Welcome to Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. This is the place where we connect the dots of TV and feminism to American culture and politics. Listeners, I have to confess, I start every episode telling you that it's special, that it's amazing, it's like the best ever. Because for the most part, once I get to the point where I'm sharing this with you, I am pumped. And it's always because something caught my eye that I feel like I need to share with you. This episode is absolutely no different. As a feminist documentarian, I relish the opportunity to celebrate the lives and the careers of women in TV. Behind the scenes, in front of the camera, wherever they might be. And Beth Sullivan is primo, just primo. I can't wait to share this with you. She was a graduate of the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. She has been in development and programming for Fox Television. She was a screenwriter. She's also been a professor. She has won awards. And today we will talk about her two main series, The Trials of Rosie O'Neill and Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. If you think to yourself, I've never heard of Beth Sullivan, and why hasn't she done more shows? It's because in 2002, she had a massive car accident and was left with injuries that were very difficult to recover from. It's an amazing story. So while she's no longer producing award-winning drama, Beth Sullivan can still deliver a masterclass in story and character development, and that's what's in store for you at this episode.
So I got a job at American International Pictures reading. And the readers were they didn't give offices to people that didn't have to, because reading, it can be done anywhere. And it was something you had to do somewhere else on your own time in your own office. It suited me fine because I didn't want to have a 9-to-5 kind of thing. So I did that for a while. Just mainly it was about money, making money. And it was a fun way to do it. I mean, I liked reading stuff. It was easy to synopsize. I mean, I got sick of synopsizing things, but I learned how to do it quickly. But I liked reading a lot of the stuff I read. I got introduced to a lot of stuff that was very interesting. People would come and pitch nonfiction books and stuff. So anyway, especially later when it wasn't AIP, when it was Fox, I was working for them. And then they were a big independent and they were getting bigger. They were getting to be a little small studio of their own. That's when the Story Analysts Guild said to them, you know what, we're not going to let you be a non-signatory anymore. You have to become a signatory or we'll strike you. They said, oh, no, we'll become signatories. So they became signatories. And they said, well, what do we do with our readers? Oh, no, we won't make you fire them. They can come into the guild, which was very hard to get into. It was a small, I think there was 50 people in it, so that everybody was working all the time. You had a guarantee. If you got fired or laid off, there was something on the board that you could go and do. And they paid more. There was like a union contract. And so I thought, well, great. So I got in there and I became a story analyst in the official guild. In doing that, I got a job offer from a man who was starting a TV division at Fox. They hadn't been paying attention to TV for a long time. This was in probably the late 70s. I think, yeah, it was probably 78 or something. And I got this job as a story analyst because this guy who was starting the TV division wanted to make it official. He said, first off, I've got to hire a reader. So I went in to interview with him for this thing because it was on the board. And he and I were like so symbiotic. It was unbelievable how much our opinions, our beliefs politically coincided. And he adored me instantly. The story analyst stuff was very clear cut. I knew what that was. Everybody did the same kind of thing. How you did it was different, but he said, well, now I want you to be a development executive, find material and generate good shows. I said, wow, that's what I'm all about.
In the late 70s, that's where it was.
Yeah. But
we had Title IX and the ERA and...
Oh, yeah. I thought 1-hour television had to be about something. Story is going to be there. The characters are going to be there. And if you are deft and wonderful at it, you can also put stuff in there that's important and meaningful in every episode in the course of telling the story. It all can be done. And if you're good, you'll do it.
Beth's mentor left Fox, leaving her to decide her future in television development. She thought about writing.
A friend of mine said, why are you doing this story analyst shit? Telling people how to make it better and how to make it work when you could just write great stuff yourself and you make more money. I said, duh, you're right. And So I quit my job at Fox without a script under my arm or anything. I didn't have a spec script or anything. I'd written scripts in film school. And it was very cheeky because I knew how it was done. But knowing how it's done and being able to do it are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew how it was done because I had read so many of them and dealt with so many of them. But I had to sit down and actually do it.
Beth spent a few years developing a series. It was quashed for reasons that had nothing to do with its quality, but rather everything to do with a male ego. When she headed back to the drawing board, her mentor said,
"You'll get another one made really quick. Don't worry about that. It's not going to hurt your career." I said, "Oh, okay." I didn't get another one made for 3 years. I kept getting other projects to write, and I kept writing. And I think I wrote, I don't know how many movies a week I wrote before 1990, between 85 and 90. A lot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I must have done a couple a year for sure.
Well, and those were the years where they were actually still being done.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the 21st century, there are not that many movies of the week because nobody's really tuning in at appointment television to any of the big networks.
Yeah.
But at the time, while cable was still in its
infancy.
In its infancy, cable was much more inclined to just do reruns of older shows, syndicated shows, some original programming, but not nearly the level of sophistication that they picked up by the mid-90s. So in the late 80s, miniseries, which now when we think about a 6-episode season from the BBC and all of our friends across the pond, that 6-episode, 6-hour-long show was often a 2-part, sometimes 3-part miniseries. Yeah. And that kept a lot of writers and actors employed. If you weren't in a series, you had a good shot of being in what was, in many cases, higher quality even than the series.
Yeah, miniseries were higher quality.
Some of the most prolific American authors, those stories have been brought to life.
Absolutely.
And good luck finding them to view them because they weren't preserved, they aren't really cataloged, and there's nobody holding the flag for some of those miniseries. The bigger ones, Winds of War and North and South, and some of those, you can catch them on YouTube.
But there were a lot of ones that were about a lot of great stuff. Well, that's a shame.
But you were there, and it contributed to your career, and it kept you honing your craft of writing, which then brought you to the opportunities of The Trials of Rosie O'Neill and Dr. Quinn.
In 1990, Jeff Sagansky was president of the network at CBS, and he not always liked what I wrote, but liked the quality. He really got that. So 1990, he called me and he says, "Listen, I have a series." I said, "No, my agent mentioned that. You want me to do a pilot? I'm not in the 1-hour business." He said, "Well, now you're going to be." Well, okay. When you put it that way, he says, "It's the same thing, a little shorter here and maybe longer there, whatever, depends on what we're doing." So he said, "Pitch me something. What do you want?" He said, "I'm not telling you what I want." I said, "All right, well, then do this for me at least. Tell me what you need." And he was probably the last person in Hollywood to ever say this, but it was the truth at that time. He said, "I really need an 8 o'clock family drama." I said, "Done. I'll come back to you with it." I went off and said, "I've never thought about a series. What do I like?" Okay, first of all, I like period stuff. And I called him and I said, "Can it be a period piece?" "It can be anything you want, Beth. I'm trusting you, but I'll point out that there are no period pieces on television." I said, "Does that make it off limits?" And he said, "No, not necessarily. It just depends on what it is." "Great, I'm going to do a period thing." He said, "Okay, I look forward to hearing it." I mean, obviously, I had a very privileged position with this person, and I was lucky. So he said, "Okay, figure it out, what you want to do." And I said, my favorite period is the post-Civil War, because so much in terms of women, so much was confronted at that point. Because when women came out of the Civil War and out of the abolitionist movement and didn't get the vote along with the black men, they were a little pissed off. And they said, "Well, I guess we're not going to do that. We're going to go over and do our own thing." And it really was the start of the women's movement in earnest in terms of that time. Elizabeth Cady Stanton started.
Seneca Falls.
Yeah, Seneca Falls happened. All that was right in direct response to that. I want something that has those people as the characters. And I said, "But I'm going to have a fictional character who knows them." I like doing a story within history, as long as I don't change anything or pervert anything. And I said, "I'm totally sworn not to do that. As long as I make it true to the period and make it something quality, that's what I want to do." He said, "Oh, okay." And so I started thinking, well, what do I want to do? I thought there's only 2 franchises in that day. It was a lawyer or a doctor. I don't want to do law because Rosie O'Neill.
On a beautiful day in LA, with no limits on our time, we digressed to the series Beth worked on immediately before Dr. Quinn, and that is The Trials of Rosie O'Neill. That series served as Beth's stepping stone into leading a primetime series. It aired for 2 seasons, from 1990 to 1992.
They had pitched the idea, we want her to be a upper-class attorney who's in business with her husband. And when they separate, she quits and gets a job as a public defender. As a sort of protest, against her life. She's going to go do something not for money, but for the good of. It was a great premise. I mean, that was a great start. And I just went and did the rest with some other people. I hired people and I had a little small staff. I found some great people right away who are still very big in 1 hour. I said, who are the very first people starting out? Because I can't afford any of these established people to put them right onto my team. And I have to create a team that's that good. And I said, so I got to get people who are rookies, but really good. I trust you to know that. He said, oh, yeah, absolutely. I have 2 friends coming out of AFI right now. They're graduating and they're great. You should talk to them. So I did. It was Dawn Prestwich and Nicole Yorkin. Yorkin and Prestwich was their first job. I said, oh, God, you guys are great. I've read your script. They said, oh, you like it? I said, yeah, it's a great script. Now, listen, I want you to be on this show. They said, what does that mean? What do you mean? I want you on staff of the show. You mean we're there all the time when we write the episode? I said, yeah. Look, I don't know how to do it either, but we're going to all figure it out together. I said, and we're going to make something great. And so they were there to pitch and help doing the fleshing out of it all.
The premise that was handed to you is that from The Trials of Rosie O'Neill, that Rosie is an established attorney and due to
Beverly
a
Hills
midlife, Beverly Hills, well-heeled attorney, a little Chris Cagney-ish, because Chris Cagney was supposed to have been very well-educated and came from her mother's side money. And so somebody who is educated, somebody who understands the finer things and now has an opportunity to make a difference.
It was high-quality writing. And so we all just did the first season. We pitched them all to ourselves and divvied them up and wrote them. And they were all really good.
The Trials of Rosie O'Neill starred Sharon Gless, who by then was married to the series' executive producer, Barney Rosenzweig. Barney was the ferocious protector-producer of Cagney and Lacey, fighting for the series' survival against network's efforts to consign it to crummy ratings. The Cagney and Lacey backstory, which is phenomenal, is covered in a few early episodes of Advanced TV Herstory. Go to the show notes to find those links.
It got a lot of good word of mouth, and it managed to get picked up for second season. Barney did not pick me up the second season because he did not like me. And he did not like me because I didn't let him yell at me. If he yelled at me, I said, stop, Barney. Nobody yells at me, including you. I said, it's just not the way to do business. And he said, well, I don't know what you mean. I said, well, you'll find out. Let's find out together. We're going to have a civil thing, and you can tell me your notes. If you have something to say that's constructive, I'll be grateful. But
that's how professionals do it.
Yeah, but he was a screamer. He was wanted to yell at everybody. If that gets written down somewhere and he reads it, he'll go whatever. But it's true. And so he was very frustrated. So at the end of the season, when the show got picked up, he picked up what he called the girls, Dawn and Nicole. I'm going to take the girls, but not you. I said, oh, well, I'm glad you're taking Dawn and Nicole, the women, but I'm actually glad you're letting me go too, because I had not a good time. So I went into Jeff and had a meeting with him. I said, I don't want to go on with this. Barney wants to fire me and I don't want to do it anyway. And he said, oh, well, all right, great. I said, so can I go back to movies, I guess? He said, no, you did this really great. He says, do one of your own. I said, do one of my own. Oh, that's interesting. And that's how I started cooking up Dr. Quinn. Because I liked that. Had to be a woman. It had to be, somebody who's going to make a difference in the world. And I thought, how can we bring in diversity and all the things that make it substantive? And I said, she can go west. There'll be cowboys and there'll be Native Americans that she can get involved with. I'll figure that out. She saves Black Kettle's life in the pilot, as you know. It didn't alter history. So I just said, I'm going for it. So she gets in with him and she becomes very accepted by the Cheyenne. And the people in town think it's weird. They're trying to accept her and they can't. I mean, she's a woman doctor. I mean, they've never seen that either. So she's just breaking every rule, but they're coming to like her. She has morals and depth and she treats them in a way that's dignity.
Respectful.
And, respectful. And like in the pilot where she's, I'm going to go to Jake. Jake, the barber, was considered sort of the next thing to a doctor. And people who had toothaches and stuff went to him. She said, oh, I'm going to go to him with this toothache. I want to flatter him. And so she goes there. And of course, he looks at it, takes a glance and says, and we know it's not really bad. She's making it up. But we know it's not bad. And he says, oh, well, it has to come out. And then she says, out? You mean like pull it? He says, oh, God, yes, right? It has to be pulled. And she said, oh, well, I completely trust this whole point of doing this was to flatter him and get him on her side. She said, oh, well, I trust your judgment implicitly. And okay. And then that was the whole scene of her getting her tooth pulled.
Look for Beth's signature when you catch an episode of Rosie O'Neill or Dr. Quinn on DVD or streaming. You can find them everywhere. You'll find a well-developed story that's premised on a palpable, thought-provoking conflict. And you'll also notice that every character involved carries water for the story. In terms of how you saw TV continue to unfold, particularly with the Law and Order, the legal and the cop show procedurals, do you feel that the ethical contemplation and the temptation to defy the ethical protocols of any given profession, because they all have them? Accountants have ethics.
That's where the real problems happen. I mean, big, obvious things, an issue. You can trip on those all day. But once you get into someone being something, then it's about their integrity. And do they put themselves on the line in the course of helping these people and all of those issues? What about them? And I thought that was very interesting to look in the opposite direction. Sure enough, there's lots of conflicts of interest. And so we got into that, looking at it that way all along. We just kept doing that. Sometimes it would be more important than others. Other times it would be backstory.
In your time working with Rosie O'Neill, do you have memories or experiences where women lawyers came to you or you heard from women lawyers that it was a solid show, that they found it inspirational?
Later on, yeah. I mean, I got some feedback like that. I can't remember anybody coming in particular, but we got feedback that was good. And I'm not sure how we got that, but we did get feedback that was very positive. At one point during the show, there was some gathering where it was all about getting some kind of award. We got praised and we got credit for making it political and making it ethical and not just about an issue, not just about racism or this or that, but about our own inner processes. We got to liking that. I liked it.
When you were developing it all, LA Law was still going strong. Did you, at any point, do you recall saying, we don't want to be like LA Law?
Absolutely. We don't want to do these things, these issues that are so easy to stumble on. That's why I think that was part of the impetus to say, well, what in somebody's soul are there? What's their problems? What's their contradictions? And, everybody's got them. And it'll be more interesting if we show that and we show her facing it in herself and dealing with it or not having a blind spot.
Rosie and to some degree Dr. Quinn, they were the regular lead woman. It was not to the degree that both of them were ensemble shows. It was an ensemble of four, 4 regular characters, maybe 5, not LA Law, which at any given time was 9.
Yeah. It's funny, though, because I looked at the town. I mean, I looked at all of them as equally important. And I created all of them in the pilot, which was good. I mean, I was in charge. I was the leader. I had headed the writing staff, but I didn't feel like any different than the rest of them. They were all equally good as I was, and they were all capable of managing their own shows. And I just felt like when somebody was capable, I wanted to give them that so that they would feel people who feel good about themselves and appreciate it are going to do a better job. That's the bottom line. I mean, I was self-serving in that sense. I just thought that's how you get great shows.
The wrinkle of Rosie O'Neill is that there is the ex-husband. There is the daughter of the ex-husband who was not even her daughter.
Richard.
So it's sort of the messiness of midlife.
Yeah.
Do you recall your intention to kind of complicate things from the get-go?
Yeah, but that's the one impulse you have to have as a dramatist is you have to have conflict everywhere. There's a main conflict, and then around that, this person's going to have that conflict. I liked conflict ad nauseum, basically.
And lastly, and then I think we'll move on from Rosie, is the notion that in developing her as this mid-career, upper middle class, if not wealthy, high-profile, glamorous woman, she is truly a fish out of water in the public defender's office.
Yes. Then clothes and her everything, she couldn't get a whole new wardrobe overnight. The car she could get rid of, but she just dripped it. I mean, everything about her was upper class. Dorian Harewood's character, hated it. Everything about her in a very prejudiced way. He didn't like her for all the reasons we just talked about, but also he didn't like her because she was white. We put that on the table. I said, that's part of it. He's a racist. He dislikes, if she was a black woman who was doing all that, he would like her more. But this woman, this white, rich woman, he just really doesn't like her.
All right. That is The Trials of Rosie O'Neill, which brings us to Dr. Quinn, which was the other series that you developed with all of the inherent conflict that you wanted to bring to the American West, to a period where feminism was burgeoning from what came out of the Civil War. And obviously, as feminists, we now recognize that even second wave feminism, which to some degree was white women focused on only white women's issues, we now recognize that black women still had even further to go, and any woman of color didn't even have the same rights in 1970. Here you are in the early 90s, 91-ish, 92, bringing Dr. Quinn forward. And talk a little bit about the assemblage of characters, both the young people, the townspeople, key roles that factored into incredible storytelling.
Okay, well, it was a very conscious thing on my part to want to give the viewers what I just coined a term, I don't know, probably a term that exists elsewhere, but access characters. That I wanted everybody who was tuning in to have someone who was in the vicinity of their
representation. To see it themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So that was really how it started. What is in a town? And I just went for what would there be and made each of those things a person.
And Grace and Robert E., were they part of that original set, or these?
They were there. No, Grace came in the second episode because we realized there's not enough women. We need more women. And so we said, well, how about a sister of Lauren who comes back from wherever that she was doing something, and she brings back a former slave who works with her, and that was Grace.
From a perspective of diversity and two black actors who did incredible work, some of their most challenging plots, there weren't that many series that dealt with race other than Dr. Quinn and In the Heat of the Night. And it sort of felt like they were carrying the water in years where otherwise it was an occasional topic on Law and Order or whatever might have been going on in the 90s. But these two actors were darker skinned. They really were representative, and you imbued them with backstories that had them as slaves, provided you then the entree to have that very immediate conversation, which is lost to history.
Yeah. At that point, they would have had to be slaves unless they just landed on the soil. There were freed people, black people, and it wasn't a lot, but there were. Mostly you would have come from that. We thought we got to deal with that. It's this post-Civil War. It's hanging over everything. How did it come out? Did it really solve anything? Did it work? So we were just trying to deal with all the consequences of the war, positive and negative, and how the people who'd been killed. We used that a lot.
In the character development of Dr. Quinn, it feels like you were always juggling a bit of a balance, which contributed to the conflict, and there you had good storytelling. The power that she had as a healer, who also seemed very open to all the alternative medicine that the natives brought forward.
When she got there in the pilot, she wasn't open to it at all. We picked it because it's a very decisive, and that is aspirin. But it came from willow bark. And so they found that, and just intuitively, it was a folk thing. The Native Americans do it, but it took her fever down and saved her life in the pilot, and she had to be a believer, And so she started saying, wow, wait a minute. They have other things that they do that clearly work, and I should be open to this. Maybe even with the things that they do that are just more spiritual. She wasn't a religious person at all. I had the church because I thought every town had a church.
Being open to alternative medicine, I kind of wonder that would have been an easier character trait of a woman than if it had been a man after the Civil War, when there was still the same power structure for white men.
Absolutely. And she knew that she had to prove to people that she was open to what was in existence when she arrived, got off that coach.
So much like Rosie O'Neill having to adjust to the life of in the public defender's office, Dr. Quinn starts to modify both physically and adjust to this new environment, new ways, yet still as a woman in the Wild West, to the degree that she had power as a doctor, she also didn't have certain power as a woman.
Yeah. There were times that we used the doctor thing to outweigh the other. It was important to save a life, and she'd get away with it. And then it solved the female issue at the same time.
Over the course of the seasons, the series was recognized and won awards in all these different categories that appreciated your instincts regarding representation. Did women say that they were inspired, or that they, sitting in a multi-generational experience, because this was family viewing, that there was positive conversation? Do you recall?
Yeah, I mean, I got that feedback from individual women. I didn't get it from any group of women. Nobody came and said, well, we all feel this. We were nominated for some things that came from groups of women, one that I didn't like at all. We got the highest award for TV fare from the Daughters of the American Revolution. Oh, great. Okay, thanks. We weren't going to brag about it, but they weren't wrong, but they're wrong about all the other things.
When you think about where feminism was, even in 1991 to 3, there's not quite as large of a spectrum now as there are women who do not identify with any aspect of feminism and blindly are following people who would like to see rights and judicial precedent taken away. That sort of is a segue to the episode called The First Circle, which was from March of 1994, late in that second season. It's a really compelling story. It's probably available on any one of your streaming services that you subscribe to, also some of the free streaming, and certainly Dr. Quinn is on cable everywhere. It is a good family drama, and if you are looking to have to teach a class, this is one. Okay. The story is basically that the townspeople discover that there is a new social club in town, and they don't really know what to think of it other than the fact that the men are thrilled to have something to do in the evenings, and the women let them go off and do it. And then they bring back these patterns for white hoods, and the women happily think that they'll help them because these women are seamstresses.
They don't read anything into it.
Nobody has any context for what this means. And then the town starts to experience violence, and that it is violence for the most part against the Black characters, Grace and Robert E. in particular, but there are some others. Grace is not actually sexually assaulted, but the KKK, the Klansmen, they physically beat her up, and then they cut her hair. The ethnic and racial definition of what it means to cut a woman's hair.
It's a sexual assault.
So do you recall where that came from and whether there were conversations about that?
Well, we said, how are we going to do that? What's something that would be so much more symbolic of disrespecting her as a woman, not just as a African American? I don't know who came up. I don't think I came up with that. I think Joseph might have said, if they cut her hair, that would be Whoever said it, it was obvious that was a great metaphor for an attack on someone without seeing blood. So it got built into the story, and it worked really great. I mean, it had a lot of impact.
And from an acting perspective, the woman who was Grace, Janelle Allen, played the trauma, I don't want to say beautifully, played it so realistically. And they carried that forward through the entire episode until the townspeople started to see what the hatred was all about. And they had to make some decisions as to which camp they were going to be in. Dr. Quinn threw herself into the middle of it all and demonstrated the kind of backbone that here we are 30 years. This was 30 years ago that you did this.
And intelligence, that she stands up and says things that are true.
I tracked down the fabulous Janelle Allen to ask her about Beth Sullivan. What was it like to work with her? And what was it like to be a Black actor in a show about the Wild West?
Beth is great. And so that permeates to everything else. And Beth was absolutely a stickler to have things historically accurate. And in a way that was never seen before. And because it was never seen before, people were questioning the accuracy of it because they didn't know that it existed unless they were people who studied and knew the history and read the books or whatever. But if they're seeing a Western, they're thinking, oh, well, it's John Wayne or it's whatever. But no, it was absolutely historically accurate. And you see now with Beyonce and Cowboy Carter and Jordan Peele's doing the documentary of the whole West and the blacks in the West. Well, the thing is, we did it first.
I found that being a leader in the Writers Guild, that things would be going along and it would be something would be going for a train wreck, and somebody stood up and said something with authority and leadership quality. People go, oh yeah, that's true, that's right, and it could swing the whole thing in a different direction. That's something that's a power that we all have. I think most people abdicate it. They're too afraid to put themselves out there and to be criticized. I think it's really important.
To that point, since I started this podcast back in 2015, and more importantly in 16, and then what happened in the end of 2016, where the structure in the country started to change, the tone started to change, families became divided. There was a recognition of two, if not three different kinds of thinking, and who were you following and what did you watch? And I said even then that if it's important, if your family ends up coming together and it's looking like division, you can always talk about classic TV because that is a shared experience that predates all of this. Those stories were beloved then. And if you can celebrate that and get past that part, then at least you've spared Thanksgiving and whoever had to cook the meal. You could have multiple generations of a family talking about the stories and the lessons.
The whole family there on Saturday night. I walked every night with my husband. We took a big long walk, go by houses. And I go, look at that. Houses have TVs. I even see the little glow of it. Look at that. That's a lot of people are watching TV on Saturday night. And I got this idea. That was where families, who's in there watching it? Families. That's who's home together. The kids are home. They can't go out and run around. The parents have to stay with the kids. And it's probably a multi-generational experience. They need something. They need something that all of them can like and all of them can get into and share. And I'm going to do that.
What is it about removing the trappings of contemporary society, the modern day, dialing it back to a different time? Does that make that storytelling easier?
Oh, yeah. It frees you. That's partly why I made it period. I said, I want to say a lot of things that if I say it today, I'll look like I'm just a preachy, it'll all seem heavy-handed. But in retrospect, it won't seem as heavy-handed. I felt that's what I felt. I mean, that was part of the decision to make it a period piece. I wanted to say things that I knew I couldn't get away with now. So that was the idea.
We don't think about that enough. And we certainly have all experienced the preachy shows in terms of studying television. The ones that come to mind, and they're quite enjoyable, though, are Lou Grant and Quincy. And they were very progressively themed. So it was preaching in one direction only, from a soapbox of authority, or at least of access to information and education. When you take a look at some of the period ones where it's the Waltons and MASH, the stories that are getting told and the morals shared oftentimes are either intergenerational or across the power spectrum, whether it was Colonel Potter and MASH handing it down to Radar, or sometimes Radar handing it up. And there was an equality to that. I think about that a lot. And listeners, I just kind of encourage you as you watch whatever episode you're watching of whatever series, whatever you're binging this month, take a look at how those stories get developed, because we are not as literate about storytelling as I think we are. Moving on to another fascinating story. This came from season 4 of Dr. Quinn. And listeners, we're here with Beth Sullivan, who is the showrunner of Dr. Quinn. She was the first successful woman executive producer, only person who was the executive producer. Women have shared that title, but she was the first of a series that made it past the 7th episode.
And also who is the creator.
Yes. The other Dr. Quinn episode I wanted to talk to Beth about was An Eye for an Eye from the 4th season. It involved the treatment of outsiders and the public's reaction to the rape of a girl in the town. It conveys the timeless questions of the value of life. The episode is not graphic because it's family viewing, but you understand what has happened.
The adults can understand.
Yeah.
The kids can watch and not know she was somebody did something mean to her.
over the course of time, they're trying to sort of figure out who did it. The seedy, seamy, sketchy guy gets fingered. He's going to go to trial, and vigilante justice takes over before the trial is even allowed to happen. Do you recall the impetus?
Yeah. Having done law, a lot of law stuff, I thought people going outside the law, it happens all the time on impulse and emotion, and it's wrong no matter what. Things have to go through a procedure, if nothing else, just to ferret out the truth, because knee-jerk stuff is often overlooks that. So I thought, well, that's something to talk about. We could make a show about that. So we did.
So Rosemary Hart, a classmate of Brian and Colleen's, wanders into town after missing school. When Dr. Mike examines her, she discovers Rosemary was raped. A drifter, played by Johnny Reed, is convicted of both raping her and killing an elderly townsman and is sentenced to death. The town is divided over whether killing him is the right thing to do or not. Not just the town either. Dr. Mike thinks differently from both Sully and Colleen on the matter. This is the source drquinn.fandom.com, where people have put a tremendous amount of effort into preserving the legacy and the information regarding this important episode. Within the information section, the drifter pulls his gun out at the cafe while waiting for Dr. Mike, who then walks into it. I'm sure that the question was the feelings of the death penalty, because that's what was going on.
That was the idea, yeah.
Whether or not...
I think that might have been the origin. Let's deal with the death penalty. What do we think about the death penalty? And there were people at this table, we had different opinions. I was surprised that there was people who said you should kill people. But I understood their reasoning. I mean, I had felt that way at different moments for sure.
Well, it was the many different opinions about the death penalty.
Oh, yeah.
And how you took an existing cohort of characters and sort of, I'm guessing, assigned that opinion to each person, with the medical professional being the one perhaps most conflicted.
Yeah.
Which obviously gets carried over more into war shows and war movies and things where you've got physicians trying to save lives to then be put back out on the battlefield.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's the rape is what figures in it for her. That's what puts her in conflict. Would Dr. Mike consider execution of people? I said, yeah, there is. And we've got to fiddle around with that at least, because there's a lot of people who believe it, and we got to show that they're legitimate and where they're coming from, and then take a stand ourselves.
Wrapping up the Dr. Quinn experience, you've been in touch. You've done presentations and interviews with Jane Seymour. The fandom continues, obviously, not just online, but do you still get queries from podcasters and writers?
Oh, yeah. And I've, through the years, certain people that got in touch with me that were fans, wasn't like, oh, I want your signature. It wasn't like that. They were almost all thoughtful. Some of them I became really good friends with. To this day, when they come to Los Angeles, we spend a lot of time together. Anyway, but there's different people that I've become more than just a casual friend with. I've become a good personal friend. I stay in touch.
As much as someone advised Dawn Prestwich and Nicole Yorkin not to do a family hour drama, the fact that, for the most part, the non-violent, non-gritty series play better in the world, because as Americans, we think we are the only consumers of our TV. Oh, no, contraire.
Yeah, many more people around the world watch than we do.
Right, and they pay closer attention, and this is their connection. Hence, when you have showrunners, when you have people like Beth Sullivan really trying hard to be able to represent the kinds of people who are watching, it is by age, it is by ethnicity.
Oh, yeah, we're conscious that we're trying to, that it has to be able to cross cultural lines. We're very conscious of that.
And within storytelling in general, storytelling itself can cross cultures because there's only so many different ways to tell a story. But the audience that exists today for some of the TV that we're covering here on Advanced TV Herstory, it is, in fact, worldwide. And we as Americans should be very proud of some of that incredible art that has been put out there, because there are a lot of people who would like to say that America doesn't have a whole lot of art, what you think of as a painting or music, whatever it is. I just need to make that point, because it kind of factors into the appreciation of television as art. So all of this storytelling, which you've obviously were educated in it, You've taught at UCLA in the writers program. You've gone back to the American Film Institute and taught people who are writing film as well as TV, I'm guessing.
They were fellows. It was the whole year.
And when you talk about how you honed your craft, do you cite series that you watched or movies that you saw as a young, impressionable woman that compelled you to this?
I became a writer just because my friend said, well, you could write it better than this. Why don't you just be a writer? I just didn't think of myself in a lofty sense, like I'm a writer. It didn't occur to me that I could say that or do that or be that. And it was St. Elsewhere. I loved St. Elsewhere because it was smart. And the shows like that, I would try to find, them. And there were some.
That's a question that, for the most part, everybody who I've ever interviewed, who I asked the question, what was that TV series? You can't answer it with just one, but rather kind of a panoply. Yeah. So interesting.
I loved doctor shows. I loved law shows.
Just hearing Beth's stories, I capture the energy of what working with her must have been like. I am grateful to Janelle Allen for sharing her thoughts about Beth's career, talents, and strengths.
Like the Brits, who can take women of certain ages and put them in the forefront of a story and make them flawed. Not only Dr. Quinn, but before Dr. Quinn, which I didn't know that Beth was involved in this show, but she was a showrunner. But I had done 2 episodes of Cagney and Lacey, and so I became very close to, I knew Sharon and Tyne, of course, but Barney Rosenzweig I had met even before he married Sharon Glass. And so they offered me a part on Rosie O'Neill. And I had absolutely no idea that that's Beth's show. I didn't know. I'd gotten to it through Barney, and the role was offered through Barney, the executive producer. But Beth was the creator. But again, there's a woman in the forefront who's flawed, who's of a certain age because she's not 20 or 22, and she's living her life the way she wants to live it. And Beth did that, and I had not seen anything like that in this country. There always had to be some kind of man doing whatever. At the same time, when we were coming on, Dr. Quinn, Helen Mirren, Prime Suspect, was coming on. And to me, it was almost, because I thought Prime Suspect was amazing, the same kind of ideas, although this is the American West. And so Beth Sullivan, to me, was like the American version of Linda LaPlante. It was an interesting woman time. And I think that Beth was a trailblazer in a respect where telling stories about women of a certain age and not being constricted to a certain kind of stereotype. And I think that sort of permeated to all of our characters.
So here we have been with Beth Sullivan getting the inside look at the development, like the real step-by-step development of The Trials of Rosie O'Neill and Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. 2 series that when you look at, and I use the term with air quotes, strong female characters, they are 2 that will stand the test of time as women who in the early 90s stood out as the leaders and as the ones who were comfortable to get outside of the life that they had been brought up with to then lead in an entirely different way. And we are grateful to Beth for being with us today.
Oh, thank you. It's funny because when you described that person, that was just me. I was just writing about myself. In fact, when people have asked me, is there some of you in Dr. Quinn? I said, it is me. It's me in 1867 being a doctor in the Old West. Yeah, it's me. On some level, I think a writer always is their protagonist, but in every way, that's how I imagined it. What would I have done? I didn't think, what would Dr. Quinn have done? She was me.
That is the power of writing, and it's the power of storytelling. But more importantly, what I get sitting here with Beth is the confidence that we should have in ourselves, that we can do something that others are just sort of looking at us, perhaps waiting, wondering if we're going to rise or not. You have that power. Trust yourself, trust your instincts,
Absolutely.
Take the risks. And once you are to the point where you've made the sale and you've got the job, then build that team and bring along those who are like-minded and use that power, because if you have the power to assemble the team, then bring out the group that's going to...
That's what I felt. I felt, oh, wow, I'm in charge of this. This is awesome. Because I can actually put together such a great bunch of people. We can do all sorts of damage.
Listeners, that's where it's at. This is why I podcast, because I get to sit and hang out with Beth Sullivan on a Thursday afternoon. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Look to the show notes for links to Dr. Quinn fan sites and those old episodes of Advanced TV Herstory that provide the amazing backstory of Cagney and Lacey.